My name is Sophia Reynolds. I am 34 years old and I live in a world built on data. As a senior analyst for Apex DataWorks, my job is to find the signal in the noise, to identify patterns, and to build predictive models that make sense of chaos. I work remotely from a small two-bedroom house in Willow Creek, Illinois, a picture-perfect HOA neighborhood where every blade of grass must be exactly 2.5 inches and American flags can only fly on approved holidays. A house I bought with my own money, furnished with my own meticulous taste, and guarded like a sanctuary. Every line of code, every spreadsheet, every query I run is an exercise in logic and order. My life, until recently, reflected that. It began with a text message a little over a year ago. It was from Brooke, the daughter of our beloved HOA president Linda Hargrove, the woman everyone called Karen, behind her back but smiled at in the monthly meetings. Hey Sophia, lifesaver needed. My sitter bailed. Can you watch the kids just for the weekend? Mom says it's perfect community support since you work from home anyway. Just for the weekend. That was the initial data point. I said yes, of course. Brooke at 38 was a whirlwind of beautiful chaos. She had 3 children, 10-year-old Leo, 7-year-old Mia, and 5-year-old Chloe from 2 different ex-husbands. She was always navigating some new drama, some fresh heartbreak, some exciting new chapter that required her full undivided attention, while her mother Linda ruled the HOA like a mini dictator. On the other hand, was the stable variable in the neighborhood equation. Single, no kids, a steady career, a quiet life, reliable. It was a role I hadn't chosen, but one that had been assigned to me through years of quiet compliance and Linda's not-so-subtle suggestions at board meetings. That first weekend was a blur of spilled orange juice, loud cartoons, and refereeing arguments over a single blue crayon, while Linda texted me reminders about keeping the lawn perfect because the HOA is watching. It was exhausting, but manageable. I love my neighbors' kids. Their energy, though overwhelming, had a certain purity to it. When I handed them back to Brooke on Sunday night, she hugged me tight, called me her absolute rock, and promised to make it up to me. Right after Linda posted on the HOA Facebook page about how wonderful community members like Sophia make Willow Creek shine. But the pattern began to emerge. Data doesn't lie. Just for the weekend became a recurring event. Then it bled into Thursday nights. Then it was, can you just pick them up from school on Wednesday? I have a yoga class that runs late. Mom says it's fine. You're home anyway. The initial requests, once framed with a veneer of polite desperation and HOA community spirit, became assumptions. The texts became shorter, more declarative. Dropping the kids at 7. Have a date? No question mark. No please. Just a statement of fact, a logistical update in a schedule that I had no part in creating but was now central to executing. My sanctuary, the quiet house in Willow Creek HOA, where I could hear the hum of my server rack and the clicking of my own keyboard between the absurd fines for mailbox color violations, was transformed. It became a playroom, a battlefield, a daycare. My second bedroom, once a pristine guest room, was now a permanent kid zone littered with Legos and half-finished drawings of HOA rule signs. My work-from-home life, which required deep, uninterrupted focus, was now a constant negotiation with demands for snacks, help with homework, and the shrill soundtrack of sibling squabbles, while Linda patrolled the streets in her golf cart enforcing grass height rules on everyone else. I'd be in the middle of a complex data migration, my screen filled with cascading lines of code, and a small voice would pipe up beside me. Aunt Sophia, can you put a bandage on my knee? I'd be on a conference call with my team in California, frantically hitting the mute button as Mia and Chloe launched into a screaming match in the living room. My colleagues would hear the muffled chaos and offer sympathetic, knowing smiles. Sounds like you've got your hands full, Sophia. They thought I was a mother. In a way, They were right. I was a mother without any of the credit, the choice, or the joy. I was a backup system running in the background to ensure the primary server, Brooke, and her all-powerful HOA mom Linda, could operate without interruption. And Linda was operating flawlessly. Her HOA president Instagram account was a curated masterpiece of a flawless community leader's glorious, unburdened life. While I was wiping sticky fingerprints off my laptop screen, she was posting selfies from the annual HOA wine night. Living my best life, HOA style. While I was trying to explain to a 5-year-old why she couldn't draw on the walls, Linda was uploading a story of her and a handsome new board member clinking champagne glasses at the country club. Here's to new beginnings and stricter enforcement. The captions were what killed me. They were full of hashtags about empowerment, self-care, and the importance of putting the community first. She was celebrated for it. Her followers flooded the comments with fire emojis and praise. You go, girl. You deserve all the happiness. Such an inspiration. No one saw the hidden infrastructure that made her inspirational life possible. No one saw me, the unpaid, unacknowledged nanny, logging off my real job at 6 p.m., only to log into my second one, which ran until the kids were finally mercifully asleep, while Linda fined Mrs. Johnson down the street $250 for a single dandelion. No one saw the groceries I bought, the meals I cooked, the laundry I did. My support was the dark matter of her HOA universe, invisible, uncredited, but holding everything in her orbit together. I began to track it the way I would track any anomalous dataset. I didn't mean to. First, it was just instinct. I noted the frequency of the drop-offs, an average of 4.2 days a week over the last quarter. I calculated the average duration, 9.5 hours per instance. I logged the expenses. I covered pizza nights, movie rentals, art supplies, which came to an average of $180 a week, unreimbursed. The numbers formed a clear, irrefutable narrative. I was being used. This wasn't support. It was exploitation. This wasn't a neighbor asking for help. It was the HOA royalty outsourcing responsibilities without compensation while preaching community first. The arrangement was a contract in which I had never seen the terms, yet I was the only one held to them, complete with threats of fines if I complained. I would sit in the quiet of my house after the kids were in bed, the silence feeling both like a relief and a profound emptiness. I would scroll through Linda's posts, a bitter acidic feeling rising in my chest. I saw her smiling on a beach, her hair blowing in the wind, paid for by the HOA dues everyone paid. I saw her laughing at a concert, carefree and vibrant. She was living the life of a woman with no dependents because functionally she didn't have any. I did. I had hers. The week had become a year and my life was no longer my own. It was just the space Linda's empire occupied when she was busy doing something else. The breaking point didn't arrive with a bang, but with the quiet, insistent beep of a calendar reminder. Project Phoenix Phase 2 Go Live 6 a.m. Monday. It was a project I had been leading for 6 months. The culmination of thousands of hours of work. The Go Live required my absolute undivided attention from Sunday night through Monday morning. On Friday, I called Linda. I decided to approach it as a simple scheduling conflict. A matter of logistics, data, not drama. Hi, Linda, I started, my voice even. I just wanted to give you and Brooke a heads up that I can't have the kids this weekend. I have a major project launch for work and I'll be working straight through the night on Sunday. There was a pause, not a long one, but dense with unspoken calculations and the faint sound of her golf cart engine idling. Oh, she said, her voice flat. Well, I'm sure Brooke has already made plans. Sophia, it's a bit last minute to be telling her this. I'm telling you now, on Friday. Her plans are her own to manage. The words felt foreign in my mouth, sharp and hard. I wasn't used to drawing lines in the HOA sand. I'll talk to her, she said, and the call ended with the click of a woman who knew she still held the rulebook. The family meeting, as the HOA board liked to call it, convened that Sunday. It wasn't planned as such, but they arrived at my house under the pretense of Brooke picking up a jacket Chloe had left behind. Brooke came in first, looking flustered and wronged. Linda, the HOA president, followed, her face set in a mask of strained disappointment, and behind her was Gary, Linda's husband, the heavy artillery they brought in when simple emotional manipulation wasn't enough. Gary was a man who saw the world in simple, unbendable terms. He was a former high school football coach who still walked and talked like he was on the sidelines of a game he was losing. To him, loyalty was everything, and loyalty meant falling in line with the HOA president's wishes. He surveyed my living room, now tidied and quiet in anticipation of my work weekend, and his gaze landed on me with a palpable weight. "Sophia," he began, forgoing any greeting. He had a way of saying my name like it was a violation notice. "Linda tells me you're leaving Brooke high and dry this weekend." "I'm not leaving her high and dry, Gary. I'm working," I said, my hands clasped in front of me. "I have a career. It has deadlines. I communicated this 2 days ago." He chuckled. A low, dismissive sound. "Career, right? You sit at a computer. Brooke is raising 3 children. That's a real job. A 24/7 job." He stepped further into the room, making my own space feel small. "In this neighborhood, we help each other. We don't check schedules and cite deadlines. HOA spirit is thicker than a contract, and it's damn sure thicker than some computer project." There it was, his favorite phrase. He used it to end any argument that required nuance, a philosophical sledgehammer to crush any inconvenient facts. My job was a contract. My responsibilities were negotiable. The HOA, however, was a binding, absolute obligation, with terms dictated entirely by Linda and Gary. "Gary, that's not fair," I said, my voice rising slightly. "I help all the time. This is the first time in a year I've said no." That's when Linda stepped in, her role perfectly rehearsed. She placed a gentle hand on Gary's arm, the calming HOA president, the voice of reason, but her words were surgical. "Honey, that's not the point," she said to me, her voice soft with pity, which was always worse than anger. "You know what Brooke has been through? 2 divorces, raising those kids mostly on her own. It's a struggle every single day. You can't possibly understand that." She gestured around my quiet, orderly living room. "You have all this space, all this time. You're single. You don't have other responsibilities. It's easy for you." For her, a weekend off isn't a luxury. It's a necessity. She needs to feel like a person again. Every word was a perfectly sharpened dart. "You can't understand. You have it easy. You're single. You're free." My freedom wasn't an achievement. It was a resource she felt entitled to deploy as she saw fit, especially when it kept her HOA image spotless. My life was a blank space on the neighborhood calendar to be filled in with Brooke's overflow. Brooke, who had been standing by the door looking like a tragic heroine, finally spoke. "I just don't know what I'm supposed to do, Sophia," she whispered, her eyes welling up. "Mark had these non-refundable tickets to a concert. It was supposed to be our one night out this month." The data analyst in my brain screamed. Mark was the 4th new beginning in the last 18 months. The concert tickets, if I cross-referenced Linda's Instagram stories, were for a band she didn't even like. It wasn't about a concert. It was about convenience. My convenience versus theirs. And in this HOA, that was never a fair fight. "Sophia, I am happy to help when I can," I said, trying one last time to appeal to reason. "But my work is important. It pays for this house, the house your kids spend half their week in. If I don't perform well, that's at risk. It's not just a hobby." Gary scoffed. Don't be so dramatic. This one weekend. This never just one weekend. The words burst out of me louder than I intended. It's every weekend. It's weeknights. I'm not asking for a medal, but I am asking for the basic respect of my time and my career. Your poor planning shouldn't have to be my emergency. The room went silent. I had crossed a line. I had presented a bill for services they had always considered free under the banner of HOA family. I had taken their narrative of Brooke's hardship and my ease and rejected it. Linda's face hardened. The soft pity vanished, replaced by a cold fury. You've always been like this, Sophia. So cold. Everything is a transaction with you. You count everything. We're not talking about a spreadsheet. We're talking about community. We're talking about compassion. Something you don't seem to have much of. Cold. There was the word. The label they stuck on me anytime my logic interfered with their emotional demands and HOA power plays. I wasn't being rational. I was being cold. I wasn't being responsible. I was being uncompassionate. I wasn't setting a boundary. I was launching an attack on the sacred HOA. I looked from Linda's unforgiving face to Gary's smug expression of victory. I looked at Brooke, who was now quietly crying. Her role as the victim fully realized. I was alone. I was the villain in my own home, the cold-hearted antagonist in a story where everyone else was just trying to survive under the benevolent rule of President Linda. They stood there, a united front of neighborhood obligation. And I saw with perfect data-driven clarity that I would never win an argument with them. Their system wasn't built on logic. It was built on my silence and their rulebook. I didn't say another word. I just gave a small defeated nod. Fine, I said, the single word tasting like ash. I'll figure it out. Gary clapped his hands together. The coach who had just won the game. See, that's the spirit. HOA helps HOA. They left a few minutes later. I stood in the middle of my living room. The silence they left behind heavier than the noise of the children. They hadn't just invalidated my schedule. They had invalidated me. My life, my work, my feelings, none of it was as real or as important as their precious HOA image. In my own home, I was a ghost, a service provider whose only acceptable input was yes. And in that crushing absolute loneliness, I knew my next no wouldn't be a request. It would be a firewall. The Project Phoenix weekend was a special kind of hell. I managed the Go Live from my kitchen table, one hand on my mouse and the other pushing a box of goldfish crackers towards Mia. I typed code with Chloe asleep on my lap. Her small, warm weight a constant reminder of my divided attention while Linda texted me HOA violation warnings about my driveway chalk drawings. I joined the 6 a.m. emergency troubleshooting call on Monday from my back porch, whispering into my headset so I wouldn't wake the kids who were sleeping in my bed because Leo had a nightmare. I made a critical error at 3:17 a.m. A misplaced comma in a string that brought a secondary server down for 7 minutes. My boss was understanding, but I knew I saw it in the logs. A tiny glaring monument to my exhaustion. I had compromised my career, the one thing that was wholly mine, to accommodate a manufactured crisis for a concert Brooke barely remembered a day later. That was the last time. It wasn't a resolution born of anger, but of cold, hard data. The cost of my compliance had become too high. The risk was no longer just my time or my money. It was my professional integrity. The system was broken, and minor adjustments were no longer sufficient. It required a complete overhaul. For 2 weeks, I gathered my thoughts, treating the problem like a system analysis. I defined the stakeholders, the resource allocation, the current workflow, and the critical failure points. The primary failure point was me. My unlimited availability was the bug that was crashing the entire neighborhood system. I had to patch it. I decided a group text was the only way. A phone call would be an ambush. An in-person meeting would be a firing squad at the next HOA board session. A text was a memo. It was a declaration, not a negotiation. I drafted it and redrafted it a dozen times, stripping it of any emotion, any apology, any room for misinterpretation. It was the coldest, most corporate piece of communication I had ever written. On a Tuesday morning, I sent it to the HOA board group chat that included Linda, Gary, Brooke, and the rest of the smiling enforcers. Effective immediately, I need to make some changes to my schedule to better align with my work responsibilities. Moving forward, I can no longer provide weekday child care for the community. I will be happy to have the kids one weekend per month, with the specific weekend to be agreed upon at least 2 weeks in advance. I appreciate your understanding as I focus on my career commitments. I put my phone on silent and set it face down on my desk. I knew the response wouldn't be a simple, "Okay, thanks for letting us know." I was decommissioning a free on-demand service and they were about to get the outage alert. Took less than 5 minutes. The phone started vibrating against the wood of my desk. A frantic buzzing panic. First Brooke, then Linda. I ignored them. Then the texts began. "Brooke, are you serious? What am I supposed to do? I have my spin class tomorrow night and my book club on Thursday. Sophia, this is completely out of the blue. You can't just do this to me. The kids need you. I need you. Linda, Sophia, call me this instant. This is not how an HOA family handles things. Gary, your president is very upset. You are being incredibly selfish." I let the messages pile up. A digital monument to their collective outrage. I was not being selfish. I was being solvent. I was preserving the one asset, my focus, that paid for my life. But in their world, my assets were community property. The confrontation came that evening. Linda called and this time I answered, putting the phone on speaker. I was a data analyst. I wanted to hear all the inputs clearly. "What is the meaning of that text, Sophia?" she began, her voice tight with a carefully controlled rage. "It means exactly what it says, Linda. My job is getting more demanding. I'm leading a new team. I can't be the default babysitter anymore. It's not sustainable." "Sustainable?" She spat the word like it was a violation notice. "What do you know about sustainable? Brooke is a single mother to 3 children. She is barely holding it together. And you, with all the freedom in the world, decide now is the time to pull the rug out from under her. Do you have any idea how that makes her feel?" "I'm not responsible for how she feels," I said. And the silence on the other end of the line was so profound I thought she'd hung up. "I am responsible for my own life. I've been giving her 40 to 50 hours of free child care a week. That's more than a full-time job. I'm offering to help 1 weekend a month. I think that's more than fair." "Fair?" A cold, humorless laugh. "You think this is about what's fair? This is about community. This is about sacrifice. Things you wouldn't understand. You get to clock out at 5 p.m. and have your evenings to yourself in your quiet little house. Her job never ends. You have no idea what real responsibility looks like." And then came the true payload. The weapon they had been sharpening for years. The one they saved for moments when I dared to value myself. "You know what this is, Sophia? It's jealousy. Plain and simple." I felt the blood drain from my face. It was such a preposterous, illogical accusation. Yet it was their trump card. "You're jealous of Brooke," Linda continued, her voice gaining a righteous momentum. "You're jealous that she has a family. You're jealous that she has children, that she has men who love her. Even if it doesn't work out, you have your job and your house, but you're alone and you can't stand to see her happy even for a moment. So you have to take something away from her. You have to make her life harder because yours is so empty." It was a perfect character assassination in their narrative. I wasn't a responsible professional setting a necessary boundary. I was a bitter, lonely spinster lashing out at the beautiful, fertile life of the president's daughter. My success wasn't an achievement. It was a consolation prize for a failed life. My request wasn't about my own needs. It was a calculated act of sabotage against the HOA. That's not true, I said. But my voice was a whisper. Her words had found their mark. Not because they were true, but because they were designed with such intimate, crippling cruelty. Isn't it? She said, her voice softening into a tone of fake sympathy. Oh, honey, I know it's hard, but you can't take it out on Brooke. She deserves a little happiness. I ended the call. I didn't say goodbye. I just pressed the red icon on my screen and sat in the ringing silence of my office. My hands were shaking, not with sadness but with a rage so pure and so cold it felt like ice water in my veins. They had analyzed my life and found it wanting. They had taken my greatest strengths, my independence, my discipline, my career, and twisted them into evidence of my pathetic loneliness. An hour later, my phone lit up with a new message. It was from Linda. Contained no argument, no plea, no further explanation, just 2 words. The final verdict from the judge and jury of the HOA. You're jealous. I stared at the screen. That was it. My entire life. My motivations. My feelings. All of it dismissed in a single, smug, 2-word text. All the years of accommodating them, of rearranging my life for them, of being their reliable, stable, unpaid support system while they enforced petty rules on everyone else. It all meant nothing. I wasn't a person. I was a function. And now that the function was being withdrawn, I was labeled defective, jealous. Something inside me didn't just break. It vaporized. The part of me that still cared what they thought. The part that hoped for their understanding. The part that felt the sting of their judgment. It was gone. All that was left was the truth. The cold, hard, undeniable data of my life versus theirs. My fingers moved over the keyboard, calm and steady. I wasn't emotional anymore. I was a data analyst presenting a finding. I typed a simple query, a response to their flawed hypothesis. I addressed it only to Linda, but I knew she would share it with the board. Fair how I raise her kids. She raises her glass. I hit send. There was no hesitation, no regret. It was the push of a button that detonated a bridge I had just realized I never wanted to cross again. The message was delivered. The silence that followed was the most peaceful sound I had ever heard. The silence that followed my text was not a void. It was a presence. It was the crisp, clean state of a system after a hard reboot. For the first time in a year, the constant low-grade hum of expectation and resentment was gone. I had severed the connection. I made dinner. I tidied the kitchen. I sat down at my desk and worked for 3 uninterrupted hours. The flow of logic and code a calming balm. I didn't check my phone. I didn't need to. The output of my action was irrelevant. The action itself was the conclusion. I had stated the truth. What they did with it was their problem. Their data set to analyze. At 10:17 p.m., the system crashed. It wasn't a knock on the door. It was a physical assault on the structure of my home. A deep concussive boom. Boom. Boom that rattled the glass in the front windows and vibrated through the floorboards. My heart hammered against my ribs. A sudden, violent percussion. No neighbor knocks like that. No delivery service. That was the sound of rage wrapped in HOA entitlement. I crept to the door, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. Through the peephole, the porch light illuminated a distorted, monstrous version of Gary's face. His mouth was twisted into a snarl, his skin ruddy with anger. He was shouting my name. The sound muffled, but the fury perfectly clear. Sophia, open this door now. My first instinct was pure logic. Don't. He's drunk or enraged or both. You are not safe. Keep the door locked. Call the police. But then a second, more deeply ingrained instinct took over, the one that had been programmed into me for 34 years. The instinct to de-escalate, to manage their emotions, to absorb the impact. I thought foolishly that I could contain this, that I could reason with him. I unlocked the deadbolt. The click was unnaturally loud in the charged silence between his shouts. I opened the door just a crack, the security chain still in place. "Gary, what are you doing? It's after 10 o'clock. He shoved the door and the chain went taut with a metallic groan, the wood of the door frame splintering slightly. The force of it startled me and I stumbled back. "You think you can hide behind a door after what you did?" he roared, his voice raw. He held up Linda's phone, the screen glowing. My text message was displayed like an indictment. "I'm not hiding," I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "We can talk about this tomorrow. We're talking about it now." He slammed his shoulder into the door again and the chain snapped. The screws tore out of the wood and the door flew open, slamming against the interior wall. He stormed into my entryway, into my sanctuary, bringing the cold night air and the stench of fury with him. He was a bull in my carefully curated, orderly world. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he demanded, advancing on me. I backed away, my hands held up in a placating gesture. "Gary, calm down. Don't you tell me to calm down." He was now inches from my face, close enough for me to see the flecks of spittle at the corners of his mouth. "You send a message like that to the president. After everything she does for you, for this neighborhood. You try to poison her against her own daughter." "It wasn't about poisoning anyone. It was the truth," I said, my back now against the cool drywall of the hallway. There was nowhere left to retreat. "The truth." He let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. "You wouldn't know the truth if it bit you. You sit in your little house with your little computer and you judge everyone. You judge Brooke for trying to have a life. You judge Linda for having a heart. You have no idea what it means to be part of this HOA. Being part of this HOA doesn't mean being a doormat." I shot back, my own anger flaring, overriding my fear. "I have a right to my own life. You have the life we allow you to have," he bellowed, his face turning a deeper shade of crimson. "You are a selfish, jealous, cold-hearted little girl who is trying to tear this neighborhood apart with your smart mouth and your spreadsheets." He grabbed my arm. His grip was like iron, his thick fingers digging into my bicep. The shock of his touch was electric, a violation so profound it stole the air from my lungs. "Let go of me," I choked out. For a moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a realization perhaps that he had crossed a line, but it was extinguished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a surge of pure dominance. He wasn't there to win an argument. He was there to reassert control. "You'll learn some respect," he snarled, and then he shoved me. It wasn't a small push. It was a violent, full-bodied thrust, a transfer of all his rage and weight into my body. My feet left the floor for a split second before the back of my head and shoulders slammed into the wall. A framed art print, a minimalist graph of the golden ratio, crashed to the floor, the glass shattering. A sharp radiating pain shot through my shoulder blade, and the impact knocked the wind out of me in a ragged gasp. I slid down the wall a few inches, stunned, my vision tunneling for a second. There was no blood, but my arms screamed where his fingers had been. My back was a constellation of fire. My head throbbed from the impact. I couldn't form words. I just stared at him, my breath coming in ragged, shallow pants. A sound tore from my throat. Not a word, but a raw animal noise of shock and pain. A half scream, half sob. He stood over me, his chest heaving. He looked down at me, crumpled against the wall amidst the broken glass. And his expression wasn't one of remorse. It was one of satisfaction. He had won. He had silenced me. "You think about that," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You think about that next time you feel like being a smartass." He turned, stormed out of my house, and pulled the broken door shut behind him. The latch didn't catch. It just swung gently open again, an open wound into the night. I stayed there for I don't know how long, listening to the sound of his truck engine starting and then fading into the distance. The silence that returned was absolute, terrifying. It was the silence of a crime scene. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself up. My entire body ached. I looked at the broken frame on the floor. I looked at the splintered wood of the door frame. I pulled up the sleeve of my shirt on my bicep. Livid red marks were already beginning to bloom. The distinct shape of his forefingers. A bruise was forming physical evidence. My gaze drifted upward, following the line of the wall to the corner where the entryway meets the living room. And there it was, small, black, and unobtrusive. The lens of my smart home camera. The tiny infrared light was on. A single unwavering red eye in the darkness. It had seen everything. It had recorded everything. The pounding, the shouting, the assault, my scream. In that instant, the pain receded. The fear sublimated. The part of me that was a victim went silent. And the data analyst took complete control. There was no more HOA family. There was only a perpetrator and a witness. There was no more drama. There was only an event log. There was no more negotiation. There was only a decision. My text message had been a declaration of independence. This was a declaration of war. And I had just acquired the perfect, undeniable, high-definition footage of the opening salvo. The last echo of Gary's truck engine faded, leaving a silence that was absolute. I didn't waste it on fear. Fear is an inefficient emotion, a recursive loop that produces no usable output. Instead, I moved with the clean, cold purpose of a system executing a critical command. First, I dealt with the physical breach. The door hung ajar, a gaping vulnerability. I shoved it closed, the broken latch scraping uselessly. I dragged the heaviest armchair from the living room and wedged its back under the doorknob. It was a temporary solution, patch, but it secured the perimeter. Then I went to my office, my temple, the command center. I ignored the throbbing in my back and the angry tightness in my arm. Pain was just a data point, an alert from the system's hardware. Could be addressed later. The priority was the software, the record of the event. I sat down, my hands steady on the keyboard. I didn't open a search engine or a social media app. I opened a terminal window, the familiar black screen with its blinking cursor a comfort. My smart home system was a collection of devices, yes, but they all fed into a central cloud server. I had the highest level of administrative access. This was my domain. I navigated to the security camera's cloud interface. The dashboard showed a timeline, a simple line of blue representing uninterrupted recording. But at 10:17 p.m., there was a red spike. Motion detected. Audio levels exceeded threshold. I clicked on it. The video player loaded. I watched the entire event dispassionately as if reviewing user session data. I saw him pound on the door. I saw myself open it. I heard the muffled, distorted audio of his shouting. I saw the chain snap, the door fly open. I saw him advance. His body language a clear metric of aggression. I saw his hand grab my arm. I saw the shove. I saw my own body slam into the wall, the picture frame falling. I heard my own scream, a raw, ugly sound that registered in my brain as nothing more than an audio peak. I watched it 3 times. The first time to confirm the event. The second time to note key timestamps. The third time to detach completely, to see it not as something that happened to me, but as a sequence of actions and reactions. I downloaded the raw video file. It was a 212 megabyte MP4. I saved it to a new encrypted folder on my local drive. I named it incident_221710114.mp4. The timestamp of the initial assault, clinical, factual. But the video was just one stream of data. A compelling one certainly, but my system logged everything. The video was the narrative. The logs were the footnotes, the corroborating evidence that would make the story irrefutable. I opened my code editor. My fingers flew across the keyboard writing a simple Python script. I used the Smart Home Company's API, the one I knew by heart, to pull all event logs from my date and address between 10:15 p.m. and 10:25 p.m. The script took less than 5 minutes to write. I executed it. The data flooded my screen. A torrent of JSON-formatted events. Device front door sensor event state change value close to open force timestamp 221704. Device entryway microphone event decibel peak value 95 dB timestamp 221821. Device hallway accelerometer event impact detected G-force 3.4 timestamp 221,903. Device front door sensor event state change value open to closed unlatched timestamp 222022. The script parsed it all and spat out a clean human-readable text file. It was a perfect second-by-second digital reconstruction of the crime, the door being forced, the shouting, the physical impact against the wall, him leaving without closing the door properly. It was beautiful. It was flawless. It was the truth, told in the only language that cannot lie, the language of machines. I saved the file system _log_22171014.txt. Next, I unlocked my phone. I took clear, high-resolution screenshots of the text messages. Linda's, you're jealous. My reply. Fair how I raise her kids. She raises her glass. I save them as text_message_exhibit_a.png and text_message_exhibit_b.png. Motive context. I now had a complete package. A folder containing 4 files. The video of the assault, the log of the event, and the precipitating conversation. It was a story told in data, and it was airtight. I didn't think about what would happen to Gary. I didn't think about Linda's reaction or Brooke's. To do so would be to reintroduce emotional variables into a purely logical equation. My objective was not neighborhood harmony or reconciliation. My objective was the implementation of a permanent boundary enforced by a system with more authority than myself, the legal system. I opened my web browser. I searched for Willow Creek Police Department. I found the online portal for filing a non-emergency police report. I filled in my name, my address. In the summary of the incident, I wrote, at approximately 10:17 p.m. on October 14th, Gary Hargrove, husband of HOA President Linda Hargrove, arrived at my residence uninvited. He forced entry, verbally threatened me, and physically assaulted me, shoving me against a wall. The entire incident was captured on my home security camera. I have attached the video file, a corresponding system event log, and screenshots of text messages that provide context for his actions. I wish to press charges for trespassing and assault. I clicked the Attach Files button and uploaded my evidence package. I clicked Submit. The page refreshed with a confirmation number. I saved it. One vector of attack was complete, but I knew a police report could be slow. I needed a parallel process. I needed to escalate. My next search was for domestic assault lawyer. Willow Creek, Illinois. I bypassed the flashy ads and looked for a firm with a professional no-nonsense website. I found one, Sterling Law Group. Their site had a secure 24/7 contact form for new clients. I filled it out. My name, my number. In the brief description of your case field, I was even more concise. Seeking immediate protective order and to press criminal charges against Gary Hargrove for assault. Incident occurred tonight. Have indisputable video evidence of the assault along with corroborating smart home data logs. Require aggressive representation. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. I attached the same 4 files. I clicked submit. It was 11:42 p.m. I closed my laptop. I walked into my kitchen and poured a glass of water, my hand perfectly steady. I looked at my phone. It was dark, silent, no calls, no texts. They were sleeping, secure in the knowledge that they had once again put me back in my place. They believed they had won. They had no idea that while they were sleeping I had systematically, silently, and digitally burned their entire HOA empire to the ground. There would be no warning, no screaming match, no dramatic confrontation, just the cold, quiet, and inevitable consequences of their own actions delivered to their doorsteps by the systems I had just put in motion. It was, I thought, the purest form of justice, an action and its equal and opposite reaction. I slept for 3 hours. It wasn't restful sleep, but a deep, dreamless state of system shutdown and reboot. I awoke not to an alarm, but to an email. The subject line was urgent legal matter. Sterling Law Group. It was timed at 6:15 a.m. The email was from a senior partner named Eleanor Davies. It was brief and to the point. Ms. Reynolds, I have reviewed the materials you submitted. The evidence is compelling. I have cleared my schedule. My assistant will be in touch within the hour to arrange a call. Do not speak to anyone else regarding this matter. Do not respond to any contact from Gary Hargrove or other HOA members. E. Davies. The relief was a physical sensation, like a heavy weight being lifted from my chest. I had outsourced the battle. I had hired a professional. The call with Eleanor Davies was at 7:30 a.m. Her voice was exactly as I'd imagined. Crisp, calm, and utterly devoid of sentimentality. It was the voice of a woman who dealt in facts, not feelings. Sophia, she said, dispensing with formalities. The video is damning. In my 20 years of practicing law, I've rarely seen a case this clean. The physical assault, the forced entry, the verbal threats, it's all there. The system logs are the icing on the cake. They corroborate the timeline to the second. What is your objective? A permanent restraining order, I said without hesitation. I want him legally barred from coming near me, my home, or my place of work if I ever return to an office, and the criminal charges. I want them pursued to the fullest extent of the law. Good, she said. There can be no ambiguity. We'll file for an emergency order of protection this morning. Given the evidence, a judge will almost certainly grant it ex parte, meaning Gary will be served and ordered to stay away pending a full hearing. That hearing will likely be scheduled within 2 weeks. I'll handle the police liaison regarding the charges. Now for the hard part. I waited. The HOA will be notified when he is served. She continued. Their reaction will be swift and it will be aimed at you. They will attempt to manipulate you, to guilt you, to threaten you into dropping this. They will reframe the narrative to make you the aggressor and them the victims. Your only job is to remain silent. You do not answer their calls. You do not respond to their texts. You will screenshot everything they send you and forward it directly to me. Am I understood? Perfectly, I said. The first volley came at 11:42 a.m. It was Brooke. A frantic 27-second voicemail left while I was on a work call. Sophia, what the hell did you do? A police officer just showed up at Mom's house and served Gary with papers. A restraining order. Are you insane? You're tearing this neighborhood apart over a little argument. You need to call me back right now and fix this. You have no idea what you've just done. I saved the voicemail, attached it to an email, and sent it to Eleanor Davies with the subject line contact from Brooke Hargrove 11:42 a.m. Then came the texts. They poured in. A waterfall of vitriol and panicked accusations. Brooke, so you're just not going to answer? After you call the cops on my family, you set him up. You pushed him until he snapped. And you had your little camera running the whole time. You did this to destroy my reputation. Screenshot. Email. Brooke, how am I supposed to explain this to people? To Mark that my own neighbor is having my stepdad arrested. You are the most selfish, vindictive person I have ever known. You couldn't stand that I had a family and you didn't. So you decided to blow it up. This whole thing is your fault. Screenshot. Email. Each message was a new data point, a perfect piece of evidence confirming Eleanor's prediction. Brooke wasn't concerned for my safety. She hadn't asked if I was okay. Her immediate primary concern was her own social standing, her own narrative. In her mind, the crime wasn't that Gary had assaulted me. The crime was that I had reported it. Then at 1:16 p.m., the message I was expecting from Linda arrived. It was shorter, but infinitely heavier, carried the full weight of our shared history. You don't know how to keep face for your president. You have brought public shame to this HOA. After all we've done for you, this stops now. You will call the lawyer and drop this. It wasn't a request. It was an order. An order from a woman who still believed she had that authority. The phrase "keep face for your president" struck me. She wasn't my president in that moment. She was an entity, an institution whose public image I had tarnished. My well-being was secondary to her reputation. My safety was less important than her pride. I took a screenshot. I attached it to a final email. Subject: Contact from Linda Hargrove 1:16 p.m. Eleanor's response was immediate. Excellent. This is exactly what we need. They are building our case for us. They are demonstrating a pattern of harassment and a complete lack of concern for your welfare. Keep them coming and stay silent. The court will see this for what it is. That afternoon I received an official notification from the court. An emergency hearing had been scheduled. A judge had reviewed my initial filing, the video, the logs, the texts, and had granted a temporary order of protection. Gary was legally forbidden from coming within 500 feet of me. The hearing to decide if the order would be made permanent was set for the following week. I felt a strange sense of calm. The system was working. I had input a set of variables and the system was processing them toward a logical outcome. The HOA's emotional chaos was just noise, irrelevant data that couldn't corrupt the core algorithm of the law. They could scream and accuse and text all they wanted, but they would have to do it from a legally mandated distance of 500 feet. They had lost their access. Their privileges had been revoked. The 5 days leading up to the hearing were a masterclass in psychological warfare, waged entirely from their side of the 500-foot line. The angry texts devolved into long, rambling emails from Linda detailing every sacrifice she'd ever made for the neighborhood. Each one a line item on an invoice for my guilt. Brooke took to Instagram, posting vague inspirational quotes about cutting out toxic people and the pain of being betrayed by those you trust most, all set against soft-focus selfies of her looking sad but resilient. It was a performance for an audience I was no longer a part of. I adhered to Eleanor's protocol with the precision of a machine. I read nothing. I responded to nothing. My phone became a tool for work and for communication with my lawyer. Its other functions temporarily decommissioned. My home, with the armchair still wedged against the newly repaired doorframe, became my fortress. I worked. I prepared. Eleanor and I had a final prep call going over the video and the logs, anticipating their arguments. She was confident. They have emotion, she said. We have evidence. In a courtroom that's an unfair fight. On the evening before the hearing, an unknown number with a Chicago area code flashed on my screen. My first instinct was to ignore it, to categorize it as another potential vector of harassment. But it wasn't local. It wasn't a number I recognized. Curiosity, the analyst's core trait, got the better of me. I answered. Hello, is this Sophia Reynolds? The voice was a man's, a low baritone I didn't recognize. It was calm, measured. Who is this? I asked, my tone cautious. There was a pause, a moment that felt like it was stretched across decades. This Gregory, he said. Gregory Reynolds. I'm your father. The name hit me like a physical blow. Gregory, my father, a man I hadn't spoken to in nearly 20 years. A man who existed only in a handful of faded photographs and in the vague, resentful stories my mother sometimes told. He was a ghost, a myth, a variable I had long since written out of the equation of my life. I sank onto the edge of my sofa, the phone feeling heavy and strange in my hand. How did you get this number? Was all I could manage. Your Aunt Susan, he said. She still talks to one of Linda's cousins. She told me what was happening, about the court order, about Gary. I waited, my mind racing. I braced myself for what would come next. A lecture, an appeal for neighborhood unity, a request to hear his side of the story. I was prepared for anything except what he actually said. I just wanted to call and tell you one thing, he said, his voice direct with no trace of apology or sentimentality. I heard what happened. You're not wrong. The words were so simple, so direct. They bypassed all my defenses. I had been called selfish, cold, jealous, and vindictive for a week. I had been accused of tearing the neighborhood apart. And now the man who had actually left the family was the first person to tell me I was right. A choked, strangled sound escaped my throat. You don't even know what happened, I whispered. I know Linda, he said. And in those 3 words he explained everything. He explained his own absence. He explained my entire childhood. And I know the kind of man she'd marry. She needs a man who enforces the world she builds. I wasn't that man. This Gary fellow sounds like he is. Let me guess. Nothing is ever her fault. Brooke is a permanent victim who needs to be protected. And you, the quiet, smart one, are the designated shock absorber for the entire dysfunctional system. It was as if he had read the last 20 years of my life's data logs. He had seen the pattern. He had lived in the same broken system and had chosen the only escape route available to him. Why are you calling? Gregory? I asked, my voice still shaky. Susan told me the hearing is tomorrow morning with Judge Miller, right? Yes. How do you know that? Small town, he said. I also know you have a lawyer, Eleanor Davies. She's good, very sharp. But Linda and Gary will come in there with a narrative. They will paint you as an ungrateful, unstable neighbor. They will lie. They will perform. Linda is an expert at performing. He was right. That was my one fear, that they would somehow twist their emotional narrative into something a judge would believe over my cold, hard facts. I want to offer you some help, he continued. Not because I'm trying to be a father after all these years, but because what they're doing is wrong, and I have a resource that might be useful. A resource. I have a friend, he said, a man named Julian Croft. We went to law school together at Northwestern. He's one of the top litigators in Chicago now. He's also a man who spent the better part of a decade playing golf with Judge Robert Miller every Thursday morning at the local country club before Miller moved to Willow Creek. They were friends. Julian knows how he thinks. He knows what he respects and what he despises. I was silent, processing the information. This wasn't an offer of emotional support. It was an offer of high-level strategic intelligence. It was a cheat code. What are you suggesting? I asked. I'm suggesting that Julian make a call to your lawyer. Not to influence the judge. Nothing like that. Just to provide some context. Some background on the best way to present a case to him. Miller is an old-school by-the-book judge. He has no patience for theatrics or emotional appeals. He respects evidence above all else. And he has a particular distaste for bullies, especially men who bully women. Julian can give Miss Davies the exact playbook on how to frame Gary, not just as an abuser, but as the kind of man Judge Miller personally loathes. My analytical mind took over. pushing aside the swirling emotions about the man on the other end of the line. He was offering me a tactical advantage, a way to optimize my approach for the specific system I was operating within. It was the most useful, most practical, most him thing he could have possibly offered. "Okay," I said, the decision made in an instant. "Tell him to call her. He will. First thing in the morning." There was another pause. "Sophia," he said, his voice softening just a fraction. "For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. Takes courage to stand up to that machine. I just ran away from it. You're trying to dismantle it." He hung up before I could respond. I sat in the darkness of my living room, the phone screen dark in my lap. I had entered this fight alone, armed only with my own evidence and a belief in the logical progression of justice. But now a ghost had walked out of my past, not with an apology or an explanation, but with a weapon. He had given me a map to the judge's mind. The HOA was preparing for a battle of emotion and manipulation. They had no idea I was about to walk into that courtroom with a precise tactical understanding of the man who held their future in his hands. The playing field had just been tilted so steeply in my favor it had become a landslide. I sent a final email to Eleanor Davies. Subject: urgent tactical update for tomorrow's hearing. Eleanor had received the call from Julian Croft at 7 a.m. sharp. When she picked me up an hour later, there was a new razor-sharp edge to her confidence. "The playbook we received is a gift," she said as we drove to the courthouse. "Judge Miller doesn't just dislike bullies. He holds a special contempt for men who use physical size to intimidate. Our entire strategy is now one simple sentence. We let Gary hang himself with his own rope." The waiting area outside the courtroom was a beige, sterile purgatory. We sat on a hard wooden bench, our files neat in Eleanor's briefcase. They arrived 10 minutes after us. Gary, Linda, and a harried-looking local lawyer who seemed perpetually 2 steps behind them. Gary was dressed in a suit that was too tight in the shoulders, a display of peacocking aggression. He was trying to project power, but he only looked cornered. Linda was dressed in muted tones of gray, her face a carefully constructed mask of maternal grief. She was playing the role of a woman whose heart was being torn in two by her warring neighbors. They sat on the opposite bench. Gary fixed me with a stare of pure hatred. It was meant to intimidate me, to make me flinch. I met his gaze, held it for a beat, and then looked away, not out of fear but out of disinterest. I was no longer a participant in his emotional games. I was an observer and he was the subject of my analysis. Linda wouldn't look at me at all, which was somehow more damning. "All rise." We filed into the small courtroom. It smelled of old paper and stale coffee. Judge Robert Miller entered and sat behind the bench. He was exactly as Gregory had described, an older man with a fringe of white hair, a stern, deeply lined face, and intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He looked over the documents before him, his expression unreadable. He addressed Gary's lawyer first. "Mr. Hayes, I have reviewed the petitioner's request for a permanent order of protection and the evidence submitted. This is a serious allegation. How does your client respond?" Mr. Hayes, sweating slightly under the fluorescent lights, stood up. "Your Honor, my client Mr. Hargrove vehemently denies these baseless accusations. This is a simple neighborhood misunderstanding that has been blown tragically out of proportion by an emotionally unstable and vindictive young woman." He gestured toward me. "Ms. Reynolds has a history of being cold and difficult. She is jealous of the president's family and has manufactured this incident to cause pain and disruption." Judge Miller listened. His fingers steepled. He gave no reaction. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Ms. Davies, your presentation." Eleanor rose, the picture of calm competence. "Your Honor, we won't waste the court's time with character assassinations. We will rely on simple documented facts." She didn't start with the video. She started with the foundation. Just as Julian Croft had advised, she presented the text messages. Linda's, "You're jealous." My reply. She showed my phone records documenting the dozens of unanswered calls and harassing messages I received after the incident. She submitted my detailed log of the past year, the spreadsheet tracking the hours of childcare, the unreimbursed expenses. What this shows, Your Honor, Eleanor stated, is a clear pattern of exploitation culminating in a reasonable boundary set by my client. The respondent's violent reaction was not to a misunderstanding but to a loss of control. Gary was shifting in his seat, whispering angrily to his lawyer. Linda sat ramrod straight, her expression of grief beginning to look strained. This wasn't the narrative she had prepared for. "And now, Your Honor," Eleanor said, her voice dropping slightly, "we will present the core of our evidence, the video footage from the security camera inside Ms. Reynolds' home timestamped at 10:17 p.m. On the night in question, a bailiff dimmed the lights slightly and turned on a large monitor facing the judge but angled so the whole room could see. Linda leaned forward, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. It was clear in that moment that she had never seen it. She had only heard Gary's version of the story, a sanitized, self-serving account of an unruly neighbor who needed to be disciplined. She was about to see the raw data. The video began. The screen showed my empty entryway. Then the percussive, violent pounding started, making the people in the courtroom physically jolt. The audio was crystal clear. Gary's voice, distorted with rage, filled the silent room. "Sophia, open this door now." I watched Linda's face. The mask of the grieving president dissolved in real time. Her lips parted slightly, her eyes fixed on the screen widened. This was not the story she had been told. The video continued, the chain snapping, the door flying open, the on-screen version of Gary storming inside. I saw Linda's hand come up to her mouth, her knuckles white. She was seeing her husband, her enforcer, as a predator. Then came the confrontation, the shouting. His voice was terrifyingly loud in the quiet courtroom. "You have the life we allow you to have," he bellowed from the screen. Then he grabbed my arm. Linda flinched as if she had been struck herself. And then the shove. It was more brutal on the large screen than it had felt in the moment. The sheer force of it, the sickening thud of my body hitting the wall, my own scream, raw and sharp, echoed in the courtroom. The video ended. The screen went black. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the courthouse ventilation system. I looked at Linda. She was pale, almost translucent. Her face was a canvas of pure, undiluted horror. She stared at the blank screen, then slowly turned her head to look at Gary. It was not a look of support. It was a look of utter betrayal. He had lied to her. The man she had defended had been revealed as a monster, and she had been his accomplice. Judge Miller slowly took off his glasses and cleaned them with a small cloth. He put them back on and looked directly at Gary. His voice was dangerously quiet. "Mr. Hargrove, did you just watch the same thing I did?" Gary's face was a mask of purple rage. His knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the table. His lawyer put a hand on his arm, but he shook it off. The loss of control in my home had been replayed for him in a place where he had no control at all, and his entire system short-circuited. "It's a lie," he exploded, surging to his feet. "She faked it. She's a manipulative." Lying, he pointed a trembling finger at me. "You did this? You're trying to ruin me." The judge's gavel came down with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. "Enough." His voice boomed. A thunderclap of authority that silenced Gary instantly. "Bailiff." Two uniformed officers were already moving. "Mr. Hargrove," the judge continued, his voice now like ice, "I find you in direct contempt of this court. You have threatened a petitioner in my presence. Your behavior in this video is appalling, and your behavior now is inexcusable." Gary stood frozen as the bailiffs reached him. One of them took his arm and twisted it behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs locking into place was the loudest sound I had ever heard. "You can't do this," Gary sputtered, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. "I just did," Judge Miller said flatly. "Remove him." They led him away, a sputtering, defeated man stripped of all his bluster and rage. He was just a pathetic bully who had finally run into a wall he couldn't shove. The courtroom door closed behind him. Linda was left alone at the table, a solitary figure in a sea of polished wood. She was staring at the spot where her husband had been standing, her face utterly blank. Her narrative, her family, her carefully constructed HOA world, all of it had just been handcuffed and led away, and the trial was only just beginning. The courtroom door clicked shut, severing the last echo of Gary's impotent shouting. The silence he left in his wake was thick and heavy, punctuated only by the rustle of papers from his bewildered lawyer. Linda had not moved. She sat alone at the respondent's table, a statue carved from shock, her gaze fixed on the empty space where her husband had just been shackled. Her protector, her enforcer, the man whose anger she had so expertly wielded, had been revealed as nothing more than a common thug. Judge Miller watched the door close, then made a note on the legal pad in front of him. His expression was grim. He looked at Gary's lawyer, who looked as if he wished the floor would open up and swallow him. "Mr. Hayes," the judge said, his voice cold and even, "given your client's performance, I am inclined to grant the petitioner's request. However, the petitioner herself has been maligned in this courtroom. Her character has been attacked and her motivations questioned." He turned his gaze from the lawyer to me for the first time. His stern expression softened with something that looked almost like empathy. "Ms. Reynolds," he said, "you have been through a great deal. Before I make my ruling, I would like to offer you the opportunity to make a statement to the court. If you wish." Eleanor placed a reassuring hand on my arm, but I didn't need it. I was ready. This was the final step in the execution of my program. I had presented the quantitative data, the logs, the video. Now it was time for the qualitative analysis. I stood up and walked to the lectern. It was made of the same dark polished wood as the benches. I adjusted the small microphone, the feedback a brief soft squeal. I did not look at Linda. I looked directly at Judge Miller, one analyst presenting her findings to another. "Thank you, Your Honor," I began, my voice clear and steady. It didn't waver. I was not a victim pleading for sympathy. I was an expert witness testifying on the facts of my own life. "The Respondents' Counsel," I started, gesturing slightly toward the flustered Mr. Hayes, claimed that my actions were motivated by jealousy. He described me as emotionally unstable and vindictive. For most of my life, this has been the narrative the HOA has used to dismiss my reality. Any attempt I made to establish a boundary, to prioritize my own well-being, was categorized as a personal failing, an emotional defect. I was cold when I was being logical. I was selfish when I was being responsible. And finally, I was jealous when I simply ran out of room for their lives in my own. I paused, letting the words settle in the quiet room. "I want to be perfectly clear. I am not jealous," I said, my voice dropping a fraction, gaining intensity without gaining volume. "I am exhausted. I am exhausted from being forced into motherhood I did not choose. While the president's daughter was celebrated for pursuing a life of adolescent freedom, I am exhausted from my home being treated as a free 24-hour daycare and my career being treated as an inconvenient hobby. I am exhausted from being the neighborhood's designated adult, the stable system expected to absorb every crisis and being given no credit for it, only criticism when the system finally reached its breaking point." I glanced down at my notes, though I didn't need them. The data was etched into my memory. Over the last year, I provided Brooke with more than 2,000 hours of unpaid childcare. I spent an estimated $9,000 of my own money on food, supplies, and activities for her children. I did this while working a demanding full-time job. This was not support. It was a subsidy. It was a second unacknowledged job that allowed the president's family to avoid the full responsibilities of their own choices. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Linda flinch. She was hearing the numbers, the cold, hard accounting of my servitude. It was a language she couldn't argue with, a truth she couldn't reframe with emotional manipulation or HOA bylaws. When I finally attempted to scale back this subsidy, I continued, my eyes fixed again on the judge, to reclaim a small fraction of my own life. I was met not with understanding but with accusations. The final accusation, the one that precipitated the events on the video you saw, was the one they have always used to silence me. I reached into my pocket and took out my phone. I unlocked it and navigated to the message. My hands were perfectly still. There were no tears in my eyes. I was not performing sadness. I was presenting evidence. Your Honor, I would like to read into the record the final text message I received from HOA President Linda Hargrove on the evening of the assault. It was sent in response to my request for a boundary. It is the entire basis for their claim of my jealousy. I held the phone up slightly, as if to show it to the court. Then I looked at the screen and read the two words into the microphone. My voice was flat, a simple recitation of fact. You're jealous. The words hung in the air. Two simple words stripped of their context and laid bare in the sterile light of the courtroom. They sounded obscene. They were the key to the entire rotten codependent system. The final pathetic weapon of a manipulator who had run out of logical arguments. A profound, absolute silence descended on the room. It was heavier than the silence after the video. It was the silence of shame. The bailiff stood a little straighter. The court reporter's fingers froze over her keys. Even Mr. Hayes had the decency to look down at his table. And Linda crumpled. It wasn't a dramatic theatrical collapse. It was a slow, quiet deflation. Her shoulders slumped, her head bowed, her chin touching her chest. She seemed to shrink into her gray suit. A woman publicly undone not by an enemy's accusation but by the cold, hard echo of her own cruelty. Everyone in that room had seen the violence on the screen, and now they had heard the petty, pathetic match that had lit the fuse. I placed my phone face down on the lectern. This was never about jealousy, Your Honor, I concluded, my voice as calm as it had been at the beginning. It was about a boundary. The violence you saw on that video was the price I was expected to pay for setting one. That is why this order of protection is not a request. It is a necessity. I nodded once to the judge, turned, and walked back to my seat beside Eleanor. The silence held, thick and unbreakable, a final damning verdict that needed no judge to pronounce it. Judge Miller put his glasses down on the bench. The small, deliberate action seemed to suck all the remaining air out of the room. He looked at Linda, who was still slumped in her chair, a ghost at a feast of consequences. Then he looked at me. Finally, his gaze settled on the empty space at the respondent's table where Gary had stood. In the matter of Reynolds versus Hargrove, he began, his voice a low, authoritative rumble that filled every corner of the courtroom. This court has reviewed the evidence and heard the testimony presented today. It is rare to see a case so starkly, so brutally clear. He paused, letting the weight of his words land. The video evidence is not merely compelling. It is definitive. It documents a criminal act of trespassing and assault. The respondent's outburst in this very courtroom served only to confirm the character of the man depicted in that video. A man who responds to a woman setting a boundary not with discussion but with rage and physical intimidation. Therefore, the court grants the petitioner's request for a permanent order of protection. Mr. Gary Hargrove is hereby forbidden from coming within 1,000 feet of Ms. Sophia Reynolds, her residence, and her place of work. He is forbidden from contacting her by any means, direct or indirect. Any violation of this order will result in his immediate arrest. This order is effective for a period of 5 years. He banged the gavel once, a sharp, clean sound of finality, but he wasn't finished. Furthermore, he continued, his gaze now shifting to Linda, who slowly raised her head, her face pale and drawn. This court is deeply concerned by the neighborhood environment that precipitated this event. The evidence of sustained emotional manipulation and exploitation is significant. Most troubling is the clear failure of a community leader to protect her neighbors. Ms. Linda Hargrove, you were presented with a resident who was being systematically used. And when she tried to protect herself, you did not defend her. You attacked her. You chose to side with her abuser. You did so before the assault, and you continued to do so even after you were made aware of it. Linda opened her mouth to speak, but the judge raised a single finger and she fell silent. A leader's first duty is to protect the people they serve regardless of that person's status, he said, his voice laced with a cold disappointment that was more devastating than any anger could have been. You have demonstrated a catastrophic failure in that duty. Therefore, this court is making an additional unusual ruling. I am directing that a note be added to Ms. Reynolds' legal record in the event that she should ever become medically incapacitated. This court finds that HOA President Linda Hargrove is fundamentally unfit to act as any sort of guardian or to hold any position of authority over her. You have proven yourself incapable of protecting your own neighbors. You have forfeited the right to lead. If the handcuffs had been a click, this was a sonic boom. Linda made a small wounded sound like an animal in pain. The state, the law, the system itself had just looked at her and judged her as a president and found her completely, utterly wanting. She had lost more than a husband today. She had lost the very definition of herself she held most dear. She had no one to blame but herself. This hearing is concluded, Judge Miller said, banging the gavel one last time. He stood and swept out of the courtroom, leaving the wreckage behind him. Eleanor squeezed my shoulder. You did it, she whispered. I stood on legs that felt both light and incredibly strong. I gathered my things, not looking at Linda. There was nothing left to see. Her world had been dismantled, not by my jealousy but by her own choices, laid bare under the unblinking eye of a camera and the cold logic of the law. I walked out of the courtroom, down the long quiet hallway, and pushed open the heavy doors to the outside. The air was cold and sharp, the sky a blanket of uniform gray. It smelled like rain for the first time in over a year. I felt like I could breathe all the way into the bottom of my lungs. I was alone. The street was empty. My father was a voice on the phone hundreds of miles away. My lawyer was finishing up the paperwork inside. But I was not lonely. The oppressive, soul-crushing loneliness of being the only sane person in a room full of manipulators was gone. That loneliness had been a constant presence, a weight on my chest. This solitude was different. It was clean. It was quiet. It was freedom. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, already knowing somehow who it would be. A new message on the screen. It was from Brooke, the last holdout of a fallen regime, sending one final clueless missile from her bunker of self-pity. The message contained 2 words and a question mark. Happy now? I stared at the screen. She still didn't get it. She never would. She thought this was a game, a contest of happiness that I had just won by blowing up her life. She couldn't comprehend that this was never about being happy. It was about being safe. It was about being free. It was about an algorithm finally reaching its logical conclusion. Replying was not an option. Replying would be to engage, to validate her delusion that we were still connected, that her opinion of me still mattered. It would be plugging myself back into the broken machine. My thumb moved with a calm, deliberate precision. I didn't type a response. I opened her contact information. I scrolled to the bottom. I pressed the button that said block this caller. Then I pressed delete contact. A small confirmation window popped up. I confirmed. Her name, her number, our entire toxic history vanished from my device. Then I did the same for Linda. Block, delete, confirm. Then for good measure Gary. Block, delete, confirm. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. The sky above was gray and heavy, but it felt vast and full of possibility. I had just deleted my HOA. I had run the final diagnostic, purged the corrupted files, and rebooted my entire life. And for the first time, the system was running clean. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It means the world to me. I'd love to know where you're all tuning in from. So drop a comment below and let me know what city or country you're representing. Let's connect and share our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And to help even more people find the story, please support it by hitting that hype button. Your support helps more than you know.